When we look at the data, middle-class millennials and Gen Z are on the whole earning pretty decent income, say 80,000 to 120,000 a year for a household. But they're still priced out of urban markets like Toronto and Vancouver. So in your mind, is this a failure of policy to address supply for this demographic? Or is it something else like a misunderstanding of what quote unquote middle class even is today?
I honestly think it's a bit of both. I think it is a misunderstanding of what the middle class means, but it is also clearly a lack of housing supply. And this has been an issue for a while. So you probably remember the Trudeau years. For the first time in history, we had a minister for middle class prosperity. The first one was Mona Fortier. And I love Mona. She's a good friend, great person. Um, but I think she got hung out to dry a little bit because they never actually defined what that role was. And I don't think she ever got good talking points because the very first question she was asked as minister was, how do you define the middle class? And she was unable to give an answer. And I think that comes straight from the center, right? That, if you are, getting if you're getting your notes from the prime minister's office, that should be the thing on page one. Like, here's how we're defining what your role is and who you're helping. And that never came. That was never part of any mandate letter. So I absolutely think that's an issue that is not clear in the minds of the federal government or even many provincial governments of who are the middle class. And again, not to toot our own horn, but we actually define it at the Missing Middle Initiative. We have a definition of it, which is pretty broad, but it's basically, everybody outside of sort of like the bottom 20% of incomes and the top 10% of incomes. So it's a wide swath of people, but at least we can kind of focus on going, okay, these are the people that we're thinking about, and this is the type of individual or the type of family we want to make sure has a place to live. Because the worst 10%, they're probably going to be okay, and that lower 20%, there's a lot of great groups focusing on them, doing great work. We don't want to step on their toes. So we've kind of defined who that is in a way that a lot of governments haven't, and I think that's a problem because I think it infects policy, that if you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, you're not going to design good policy.
100%. And I think there's this real problem politicians haven't sorted out yet where, you do have young people making good incomes that, again, can be six figures, but they don't live traditionally middle class as we like to think of them lifestyles. They're living in very small apartments. They're struggling paycheck to paycheck. They have massive debt. And then, especially when they talk to older generations who they look at their career and they say, oh, well, I made so much less than you. However, they've been comfortably housed for years with probably a lot of equity now. They have a hard time reconciling that you can make what appears to be so much as a young person in this country and still be in a very precarious position financially. So there's a disconnect there. And I think governments want shy away. They're scared if we give, a tax advantage or cater policy to workers who are making above a certain amount that they're, catering to the elites when, especially for younger people, these aren't elites, they're struggling. And another thing that strikes me is how often politicians talk about affordable housing as if it only means subsidized units for low income earners, where it's really housing affordability that's driving this entire issue. Like, what about young professionals who want to own a condo or townhouse that reflects their career success, not just get a bare minimum place to live? Why aren't we seeing policies that prioritize market housing for this group?
Yeah, we really aren't, particularly for the federal government. And, and again, it comes to this kind of definition, vision type thing that, the CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, depending on the program, has 7 different definitions of affordability. Sometimes it does mean that kind of social housing. Sometimes it's just any home that is, the expenses are 30% of or less of a family's income. So it can mean a variety of different things. And I think oftentimes politicians will exploit that ambiguity where if nobody knows exactly what they're talking about, nobody can be kind of truly offended of say, oh, no, you're making my home price go down or what have you. But I do think it does infect policy, right? And I tend to when I look at what governments are doing, I kind of put it into three broad buckets. The first is that kind of social housing, non-market, below market, not-for-profit side, and we see a lot there. The federal government has that with their national housing strategy. It's a big part of their Build Canada Homes. So there's a lot of attention there in the federal level. Provincially, some provinces are doing more than others. Ontario doesn't do a lot in this area. PEI does quite a bit, so there's a lot of variation. The second pocket is rental, but like market-based rental. The federal government's done a ton there. There's a lot of programs through the CMHC, like the MLI Select Insurance Program, the Apartment Construction Loan Program, ACLP. Part of the problem with doing housing policies is just like a alphabet soup of abbreviations. But the CMHC has all of these plans or all of these policies that are working pretty well. The federal government eliminated GST on purpose-built rental, and we've seen a boom in apartment construction. And in fact, the federal government's even going to do even more, like reintroduce the old MERB program of the 1970s. A tax incentive to get investors to invest in newly constructed rental housing. So they've got a lot there. Then when I look at the ownership side, it's not much. We've got the federal government has announced this GST rebate for new home buyers. It's very, very limited. Is not really going to ramp up supply. So you look at what they've done, it's not much. And most of it tends to be on the demand side, some things like immigration, but also, foreign buyers bans, cracking down on short-term rentals, that kind of thing. There is very little in there that is focused on new ownership supply, particularly new ownership supply for the middle class. And I think it is a real, real problem. So to learn more about the issues affecting Canada's young urban middle class, please follow The Missing Middle.